Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Propcast. My name is Louisa, host of the Propcast and co-founder of LMRE, the global PropTech recruitment and search consultancy. In this podcast, we'll explore how the digital evolution of the real estate industry is impacting the property market. The aim of each episode is to introduce you to a PropTech innovator and discuss how their work has created a shift in focus when it comes down to digitizing the built environment. If you're interested in finding out more about PropTech or applying for a job in this space, or keen to know who the big players are that are moving and shaking the real estate industry up, we have you covered, and we will be bringing you an episode each week to connect you to the VCs, PropTech startups, and real estate professionals from around the globe. Also, a big shout out to our sponsors of the podcast, ReamTech and PreTech, who you will hear from during the episode. Welcome to the Propcast. Today's podcast is all about cutting through the noise. And as we all know, there are plenty of products out there, and more are coming out every single month, day, year. But what ones actually work and also what makes a good pitch? And today on the show, we have Scottie Lee, Vice President, Strategy and Research at Equity Residential, joining us from Chicago, and also Marco Biasiotto, the Director of Retail and Digital Strategy at Primaris Management Inc. Marco is joining us from Toronto. And so welcome to the show, Scottie, and welcome to the show, Marco.
Thanks for having me. Thank you very much. Looking forward to this.
Now, why don't both of you talk me and my wonderful audience through your careers today? And Marco, maybe you can start us first, because you're obviously very well known in the retail real estate technology space, not only from your current company, but obviously you spent a good amount of time within the innovation team at Oxford Properties. So tell us how you got into this space and what your role sort of entails.
Happy to go through this. I started off at the Center for the Study of Commercial Activities at Ryerson University many years ago, really studying the retail sector. And from there, I moved over to Oxford Properties and then Primaris Shopping Centers, back to Oxford Properties and back to Primaris again. So a bit of a shift back and forth. But what I found in my second time at Oxford Properties was, the questions were, where's the business going and how can we really, use technology to get us there? And so that's where I really started changing my focus to really understand not about what's the research currently, but where is the business going to be in 5 years? And that's really what excited me towards getting into the PropTech industry.
I guess when you were sort of looking at the 5 years ahead, you maybe didn't predict the last year and a half we just had. And obviously you can probably talk us through a bit more about the trends you've seen in terms of the retail space, especially in sort of Canada, like we sort of briefly spoke about before we hopped on the show. Now, Scottie, what about you? You're obviously more involved in sustainability and energy, obviously within residential apartments. And you were involved in obviously the ULI Tech Council. And I think beginning of your career, you're involved in data too. So talk me and the audience through when your career started to cross paths within PropTech.
Yeah. So, over the last year, I've been at Equity Residential, one of the largest multifamily owners and operators in the U.S. And, I'm responsible for market research. And as you mentioned, energy, sustainability, resilience rolls up to me as well. Prior to that, actually, how I know Marco, I was at a large U.S. regional mall developer and owner outside of Detroit called Taubman Center. So I was there for about 13 years. And, both those are kind of experiences as the world has just a little bit evolved, and particularly around data, that I would say that's probably been the entry point. So being responsible for market research and analytics, particularly in my prior role at Taubman, that really kind of pushed us into this sphere, right? How to better leverage data, both our internal data, but the growing amount of third party or external data. And then once you get kind of in that window, then you start to look around and there's different sorts of tool sets. And then, as IoT and PropTech has really blossomed, fixed assets and so forth are now generating data as well. So it starts to kind of come full circle. So my entry point was on the data side, but then everything started to kind of hitting from there, right? So you have different systems, different toolkits, different data sources, obviously. And then most recently here at Equity, as kind of ESG has really, I would say, accelerated over the last, 18, 24 months, getting our arms around that and picking up the problem, right? Or maybe even supplementing kind of things that we've known all along, but really kind of pick up the problem from a data aspect. That's kind of accelerated, as I mentioned.
Yeah, we'll go into later in this podcast about, I guess, new technologies, but also legacy technologies, which I'm sure both of you have experienced in previous firms you have worked for. Now, Scottie, we saw each other at Blueprint, and no doubt I'll see both of you at some events that are coming up. You must get pitched to many, many times a week, whether it's virtually or sort of at the events, and people see your business cards or the cards hanging from your neck. How do you go about qualifying all these technologies? I mean, I qualify roles and clients the whole time, but there's obviously a lot more technical questions you need to ask to understand the true sort of value within them. Marco, maybe you can sort of start us if there's any, I don't know, any insights you can give us here.
It's really interesting. I mean, what I find is, and Scottie, I think you can agree, is there's waves of technologies that keep coming at us. I mean, there was a time when the mall apps groups came at us, customer profiling, customer journey, mall analytics, dashboards, geofence, e-commerce. They keep coming in these waves where, there's a new revolution in one form of technology and there's multiple companies coming at us with that same technology. And so there is a lot of noise. And there was a time when I was, opening the door and listening to everyone that would pitch just to really figure this out. And I think we've refined that a little bit to figure out, these are the key ones that seem to be working in the industry, but it's through contacts like Scottie and my other counterparts in other Canadian landlords and into the US to see what conversations they're having. And so we used to meet every 3 or 4 months and we have these conversations to figure out which technologies do you all like and which ones should we all as a unit gravitate towards. By doing so, I think what we find is there's synergies because, we're really competitive, but we're not. In the trade areas in which our shopping centers operate, we own those markets. So there's a lot of sharing of information and best practices.
And I guess, is there anything else you want to add to this as well, Scottie?
And, you hit it on the head, right? I mean, you talk to your peers, we all get standard shot and, all the CRM systems direct you to the same, 15 people, particularly in the mall space, right? Because it's a much more concentrated area, or as they say, multifamily. But certainly leveraging your peer group, but also, whether you look them up on Crunchbase or what have you, or maybe in their pitch deck, they talk about their investor base and so forth, right? You start to see some commonalities in saying, hey, have you heard of it about this vendor? I saw maybe you're not the partner investing in this, but, maybe one of your colleagues are, tell me a little bit more about their team, right? I mean, a lot of it is about the team and then the technology or whatever they're trying to sell you. Because oftentimes they're very early on, right? And whatever they're trying to sell you today, it's going to evolve in 6 months, right? And that evolution is really going to be dependent on the team. Really trying to get behind that to see if how innovative are they, how stable are they as well, right? And so because I think one of the things that Marco and I talk about all the time is, you talk to somebody and 6 months later they're gone, or a key team member has, gone to another startup and we know that because that person's calling us again with a new name or a new, new business card, I should say, and so forth. So, for large organizations, whether it's equity or Tallman or Oxford or Primaris, you need these things at scale, right? I mean, it's hard for us to kind of keep bouncing around, even if it's at a pilot every 3 or 6 months, because we tend to be a little bit more like battleships than speedboats. So if we were going to engage and want to do something like a pilot, we need a little bit of stability on the partner side, on the vendor side. So those are like some of the things that you try to pick at and try to get a good handle on before you really start to engage.
Not to that, Scottie, if, one of the really good innovations that we find, we like to share it amongst our peer groups. So that way, the more lock into it, the better off it's going to be in terms of longevity.
Yeah. Over here in Europe, and I think Nikash, and maybe he's listening into this when this goes live, it's called REMTech, Real Estate Investment Management Tech Association. So that has the likes of LaSalle, PGIM, Oxford, actually part of it, the European counterpart over here. And they get together, I think it's every 6 weeks or something. And it's something which I started joining when I set up LMRE, and they do exactly what you said. They said it's been hugely beneficial, and obviously it's very specific what problems everyone experiences, but that's literally what they do. They sort of chew the fat, what's good, what isn't good. And then they invite 2 technologies each time they get together to pitch to them. And then they all sort of quiz them. I mean, it's pretty brutal just sitting there and listening in, but obviously I learn a lot from it as well. I think Nikash is thinking about maybe making this into going to the US. So stay tuned for that if he does do that.
Hi, I'm Nelson from Property Quants. We run a hands-on, in-depth course that will teach you to apply data science and machine learning to real estate. To learn more, visit propertyquants.com/training. We also run a revolutionary course that will allow anyone to gain data science skills without needing to learn programming. To learn more about that, visit thenocodecourse.com. On either site, be sure to key in the code LMRE5 for a special 5% discount.
Okay, so now for our listeners, they completely vary, but for all our vendors listening into this podcast, is there any advice you would give to them before they decide to sort of pitch to similar companies for real estate folks in general? Like any sort of do's and don'ts. Maybe there's a successful pitch you guys want to bring up. Scottie, if you want to go first.
Sure. I think the biggest thing in commercial real estate, and I've been very much sensitized to this over the last year, is very tailored in your value prop or your demonstration. And don't think of commercial real estate as just one big sector, because the multifamily is very different than regional mall, and the regional mall is very different from power centers or strip centers. So I remember when I was on the development side, oftentimes if you're not very focused, you'll get these pitches that it's great. Like, if I was Regency Centers or Kimco, it would be great, but I'm not. I was, more like Marco on the regional mall side. And, that's kind of your shot at us, right? And so I think the very first thing is just to make sure you're very tailored, because a lot of these PropTech companies can be helpful across sectors, whether you're office or lodging, et cetera. And so when you are making your pitch, be very, very tailored in that regard. And, pushing that forward, double clicking on that idea is, what problem are you trying to solve as well? Right. And again, it could be common across the sectors, but oftentimes it's going to be very specific. So if you're talking to Marco in the retail regional mall space, it's going to be a little bit different than Scottie in the multifamily space. And, what it really is the problem, and is that problem really meaningful enough or impactful enough to, as Marco's kind of alluded to before, like, he and I can spend all day literally just taking vendor calls, right? Or, picking some startups and so forth. So, is the problem that you're really trying to solve for us all that meaningful and impactful? Or is it's a legit problem, but maybe a secondary problem, and maybe you're better off as a bolt-on feature to something else, right? Particularly like maybe on the data side, which I know is not quite PropTech, but on the data side. So sometimes we'll get very small slices and say, hey, like, we got the best income data. Yeah. And that's great, but how can we then marry that with other data we may look at, other demographical data or psychographical data or lifestyle data or something, right? And it's a big lift sometimes just to kind of push through each of these data vendors through all the systems and get everyone sensitized to it. So you may have the best income data, but you're only solving a small little issue, right? Yeah, the cost is probably the same as if you got the full bill, right, of all the demographics and so forth, right? And so you may be better off of bolting that on to partnering with a broader demographics provider or, psychographics provider in that regard.
Yeah, we're seeing a lot more partnerships, also some M&A. So hopefully it allows some businesses to be a lot more sort of tailored, like you said, understand their clear value proposition and sort of leave it to another business to solve, I don't know, whatever that problem could be. Marco, is there anything else, any big do's and don'ts you'd like to add on to what Scottie just said?
No, I think he really covered it, from scalability. I mean, you have some of these shopping centers that, their sales are $1 billion a year. You have to give us an innovation that really moves the needle. I'm not going to spend a lot of time working on an innovation that brings me 4 returns to our shopping center on a daily basis. I mean, it's just not relevant. So it has to be something that's large enough and scalable enough across our portfolio. In terms of big don'ts, the one thing I can't stand is the constant email blasting that we're getting from multiple people within an organization. It's just, it puts a red flag up to say, I'm out. I don't want to hear anything more from you. You're done.
Right. Well, everyone listening in, that was a big don't. So don't try it. Okay. Right. Now, so there's loads of this new flash technology out there, which is great. And we're loving seeing the evolution of that happening. But I think what a lot of the early stage of general technology companies often forget is that you guys have legacy systems. And I'm sure you guys would love to have this new tech, which is so efficient. And, you want to try you want to pilot new technologies, but it's so important that people understand that you already have those in place and change doesn't happen straight away. So are there any technologies you feel that can sort of almost enhance the legacy technologies to help, other firms similar to, your equity residential or so forth? Don't know, Scottie, do you want to answer this one?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of work in trying to connect, I would say, legacy systems with more modern technologies, particularly around, again, data and analytics and so forth. Particularly, I think in commercial real estate, Marco, it'd be great to hear your opinion. It does seem like a lot of our systems have been siloed, the legacy systems, right? Whether it's our property management systems or our demographical, GIS sort of programs. And then if you get out to the operation side, building data, BMSs and so forth, right? And how do we kind of connect it all together without blowing everything up? And so, at times you get pitches of you can blow it up and start over, but we've been around for decades, right? And it's very hard to do that and very disruptive, right? And so if there's technologies out there that help us kind of connect the legacy systems together seamlessly, be great. And then I think on the startup side is thinking about knowing that we have a lot of in-place systems is how can you get quickly up and running, right? That's ease and so forth, right? You don't have to do a lot of customizations and so forth. And I think that's a lot of the aims of a lot of the PropTech startups is to do that. That's the goals. And I do see that appreciation on, say on the startup side, but then it's, kind of really kind of getting into the weeds and, maybe even co-creating, which I know is a overused word often, kind of getting into the weeds and then having that demonstration, that case study that, and then over time too, right? And so because our systems are going to evolve, the technology evolves as well. And so that's like, one of the things maybe kind of going back to your prior question is, one of the things we always ask really quickly is like, hey, who have you done this for that's at scale? It doesn't have to be the size of equity, but it can be a landlord with 5 mom and pop sort of apartment buildings, right? And so where have you done this at scale and for how long? Right. Because again, longevity is an important feature.
Marco, is there anything you want to build on there?
I'll just add that, from managing our shopping centers, the data inputs that we're getting from so many different places, be it from our shopping centers, from our retailers, from the operations side, from our marketing side, trying to make sense of all of this data. And they are all based on old systems that have been around 20 odd years. The people that have built them are no longer with the company typically. So nobody even understands how to unpack some of that information. So those old legacy systems are so difficult to advance it into 2021 and going forward. So there's a lot of heavy lifting on our end to get them modernized.
Hey, this is Michael Beckerman from Cretech. I'm here to invite you to check out Cretech Plus, the first streaming platform devoted to innovation and technology in the built world, featuring new weekly videos from the world's leading real estate and tech professionals. The first month of streaming is absolutely free, and then you could use the code LMRE to receive 25% off your second month. To learn more, visit plus.cretech.com.
Well, I guess also building on that, and this leads us really nicely into this next question, is obviously those people aren't there anymore, but lots of these real estate firms, I'm obviously hiring innovation arms. Obviously, Marco, you've been in that role before. We're seeing obviously Nuveen, Greystar, JL, CBI, the list goes on. They're making some massive new innovation appointments, but also they're trying to sort of build technology in-house and obviously using new technologies. Do you guys have an opinion or is there any businesses that sort of stand out for you that have been sort of success stories today? And Marco, maybe you can sort of obviously go first because we've obviously been directly within these roles within the innovation team.
There's a couple of examples that are out there. I mean, Westfield Labs back in the day, I think we were all sort of anxiously awaiting to see what their next innovation was that they would release. And, great company and great thought process around it. The problem at the time, I feel, and challenge me, Scott, if you like, but the problem at the time was the brain power was there, but the technology wasn't quite developed yet. So I think, they were ahead of their time. And so going forward to today, there are other groups that are starting this and the technology is finally caught up to where people want it to be. But I think it's almost a better solution to go out. And there's so much money now being thrown at PropTech to let them figure it out, let them develop the money and put it into it and just take their best practices.
And Scottie, is there any other success stories you've seen or experienced?
Maybe I'll kind of speak a little bit more when I was at Tallman on the retail side. Yeah. And I agree with Marco. I think a lot, most of us kind of circled around and agreed that, let the PropTech companies, do the innovating. But then where I think you've seen success stories is where that co-creation, again, I know it's an huge word, is you've worked with these startups that are not fully mature, but have a great idea, have that analytical and technological horsepower that may be lacking in a traditional corporate setting. Yet we have the experience, we obviously have the fiscal assets, and we know what hasn't worked, right? I mean, Marco probably has a laundry list of what hasn't worked. So we can tell people, here are the potholes. Don't step into them because XYZ startup has tried this and it's just very, very difficult. So, maybe I can steer you into this way. And so Some of the success stories, honestly, is actually from things that might not have worked when I was at Tallman. And Marco actually knows some of the folks there as well that have focused on the innovation in the PropTech space. And, we've done a ton of pilots. And what you kind of learn from there is, the limits of what the technology is sometimes it's just as helpful as when you straight goal and, some sort of technology that does actually help you kind of progress. Because what it does is it helps you focus your resources on, say, right? And it allows you to make compromises in a very educated manner, and you're not kind of grasping for something that really isn't out there, right? And I think Marco and I have spent, for example, traffic data to give you just like one specific idea. He and I have talked, ad nauseum about traffic data. And there are all sorts of problems in regards of, I think, whatever vendor any of us have ever looked at and even installed. And so, but once you know the limitations of it, right? And, you need the system's uptime and, whether it's AI or whether it's whatever computer vision that they're using, you start to understand what are the limitations of it. And then you're like, okay, these are the limitations. Here's how I can then leverage it versus just a sheer people count. Because oftentimes the sheer people count has all sorts of issues with that actual number as well. So I think oftentimes where, we found a lot of success was co-creating with these startups, right? And then just kind of understanding what the limitations are today. And then that allows us also to kind of look out for what's next, right? How do you qualify vendors, right? If they're playing in that sandbox, you're like, hey, like this would be very interesting, with new technologies, your ears perk up.
Yeah. And I guess it goes back to obviously what you were both saying earlier. It's all about comparing, speaking to your peers, your associates, what's working, what limitations they're experiencing and everything like that. We'll slowly get there once we've all, I guess you've done more pilots, with a landlord, a vendor, institution. We'll sort of know what works and doesn't work. And obviously, as we saw with COVID, there's been plenty of M&A happening and lots of businesses unfortunately didn't succeed. So I guess watch this space. Let's talk about future predictions. Are there any further sort of emerging trends or sort of other bits of, I guess, looking at sort of further growth areas of investment, or are there any sort of businesses that either of you are sort of tracking at the moment or watching parts of PropTech sort of evolve? Obviously, it changes from retail to sort of residential. Market, anything you're finding super exciting at the moment?
We've just launched in the last week a multi-shopping center e-commerce marketplace where we're linking real-time inventory of products from our tenants within our malls onto one marketplace. So we're linking, for the test case, now 5 shopping centers, and that'll expand in the next little while. So it's very innovative in that, malls are all trying to figure out this e-commerce, where the future of it is. And I think it's really for us being able to create with our physical retail company interface into the digital environment. So we built primaris.ca. Have a look at it. I think it's pretty revolutionary in the shopping center industry.
Well, yeah, I would say that is pretty exciting. Marco, we should have probably spoken about this earlier. Sorry about that. Everyone listening in, definitely sort of check that. We'll be showing details of this as well at the end of the show. Scottie, is there anything which you've been sort of working on or sort of watching closely?
Yeah, I think around the ESG space, being inclusive of climate resiliency, I think there's a lot, obviously there's a lot of focus on that just generally. And then how do you kind of bring all that data together, right? There's all sorts of different reporting requirements at the local level, which makes things hard, right? At least in the United States, right? So a lot of the stuff has been at the city level versus the federal level. And, in terms of compliance and disclosures and so forth. But then there's all these voluntary disclosures that, I cheaply call alphabet soup, whether it's GRESB or CDP or what have you. And, each of them are a little bit different, whether CSA, et cetera, and that's just kind of downstream, right? So obviously upstream is how do you collect all this data? How do you calculate all this data? And a lot of this is new, right? I mean, it's not accounting data, and it soon may be accounting data, right? Depending on what the SEC ultimately decides. And then, from COP26, talking about standard sustainability board as well. And so there's a lot of interest and focus, right? And that's just on the disclosure side, right? And I've even gotten to, once you got to the data, as property managers, how do you actually use this data? How do you to improve, whether it's asset hardening, right? In terms of, vis-a-vis potential perils like flooding and hurricanes and wildfire and so forth, right? Or how do you use this data to cut your GHG emissions or to increase your recycling and your waste diversion programs or conserve water? Certainly around the theme of what Marco and I have been both saying is there's so much data out there too, right? And I think what you're saying is cutting through the noise, which is a very apt title too. So then how do you harness all this data to make it actionable throughout the organization, right? So it's just not Marco saying, okay, I'm looking at this and then can do one or two things, is right. You really want to democratize the data, push it out throughout the entire organization. So we've been looking at quite a bit, including at Blueprint, right, is at all stages of that journey, right? So whether it's on the reporting side, like a measurable, right? Or maybe it's a measurement side, right? Or, or generating data from your fixed asset, like a hatch or something like that, right? Or you got all the climate scenario analysis data sets, right? Whether it's the 427s of the world or the Jupiters of the world and so forth. So there's a lot of interesting ideas out there and technologies and data. And it's just kind of how to bring it all together in one place.
I guess doesn't this also come back to, what all three of us are talking about earlier? It comes down to having almost the right sort of stakeholders involved in the businesses. So you two obviously both know what you're talking about. You sort of understand what the business needs, but lots of these businesses don't have people like you in their organizations yet. So I guess what I'm trying to do here at LMRE is help the funds, the institutions, the landlords all sort of hire people with your sort of understanding and skill set to sort of really help evoke change and understand where the issue is, so they communicate it to the tech companies and understand after going to these events, hey, that product's perfect for this, and then connecting the dots. So I think that's another sort of thing which the real estate world needs to overcome. But like I said, it will all come with time. Did you know that the average cost of making a bad hire in the real estate market is £60,000? Or if you're listening to us from the US, that's $83,000. Finding out an employee is moving on is never great news, but sadly, it's unavoidable. The cost of hiring so high, it's important to get it right the first time round. So if you're struggling to find the right candidates, why not consider working with a recruitment agency? We're experts at finding the right people to fill roles. And because we already have a database to hand, we can speed up the process too. So head to lmre.tech to brief us on your next hire. Speaking of time, we are unfortunately coming to the end of the podcast, but we have our final part, Scottie and Marco, and this is for our audience to get to know a little bit about both of you. So how it goes is, L is, what's your sort of main lesson you guys have learned in your career? And then M is, mention anyone or a product or a service, a shout out. R is, what's been the most rewarding part working in our space? And E is, what are you most excited about for the future? So Marco, why don't you kickstart us with, what's your major lessons learned?
From my perspective, you need to try things. You can't just stay with the status quo. So you need to be able to be open-minded and understand what technologies that you're going to look at to embrace and bring into the organization. But you need to be cautious because a lot of them will fail or they won't give you the results you need. For me, at least, one of the biggest learning elements that I've picked up in the past while. And then the next question was?
Next one is, anyone you give a mention to or product or service?
I would have to give a big shout out to the team at Drop It. So they're our partners on the e-commerce marketplace. And, they're based out of London and they've got a phenomenal product. They've already partnered with a couple of the US landlords, but I was able to bring them into our tent and then deliver this e-commerce marketplace ahead of anyone else. So we're first ever globally to be able to do that. And that's just having great partners with us that understand our business, that want to work with us. And we get each other. I think that's a big thing, right? We know each other well. We've been down in the deep holes trying to figure things out. And so now we've come up with a wonderful solution.
I guess that all comes down to communicating as well, doesn't it? Yeah. Okay, right. We are now down to R than E. So R is what's the most rewarding part and E is what you are most excited for.
I think for me, the most rewarding aspect is really to be able to deliver a leading edge innovation ahead of everyone else, all of our peers, and for them to look up to this and feel this is something that they need to be part of. So that's, for me, at least, very rewarding on a personal level. And what I'm excited about the future is so much money is being thrown into the PropTech industry. And so I'm really excited to see what sort of innovations will be coming out of the next number of years.
Thank you so much for that, Marco. Okay, right. Scottie, you're finishing us off. So start us off with what's the main lesson you've learned throughout your career?
The biggest thing would be having empathy right? So whether it's client or customer empathy, and I think one of the things, the example I often use is think about helping your parents with smartphones, right? And so when the new iPhone comes out, or, the very first time they got an iPhone, right? Just having that patience and that empathy and really understanding where they're coming from. I think, whether you're on, our side of the table or on the startup side of the table, what have you, or just working, throughout your organization, I think having empathy will go a really long way. And even if you don't hit pay dirt in strike success initially, I think, throughout your journey, those that exhibit a significant amount of empathy will certainly do good and be just all right at the end of the day.
Right. Okay. Is there anyone you want to give a mention, or, is there a product you want to give a shout out to?
That's a great question. As you asked, I was thinking about that. Yes, I think, and this is a big enterprise thing, but what I do love would be maybe like something like Tableau. I think they were the very first, probably, just to really explode out how data visualization can be made easy and helping non-data people see things in data, in an analysis very quickly, right? And so even if they can't, like, again, using the parents example, even if the parents can't create that dashboard or can't create the data visualization, the end product makes it super easy. And obviously now there's going to be lots and lots of other people in this space to kind of take that simplistic data visualization and blow it out. But I think that really, helped a lot of people who aren't necessarily data people kind of understand what the power of data can be.
Right. Okay. Now that leads us on to what's been the most rewarding part of working in PropTech, Scottie, and then what are you most excited about?
I think the most rewarding thing is working with really smart people. Like if you go through Loom, like when we were at Blueprint and so forth, you're just amazed at, all these entrepreneurs and just how smart they are. Even if, and I don't know what the probabilities are in terms of who makes it through, to a liquidity event or so forth, right? But just the enthusiasm and the great ideas that they've had, and then they're putting their own blood, sweat, and tears into that product development. And I think Marco would agree too, because he and I, when we were on retail side together, just through those conversations, even if the product might not have been right for us, like, there might have been a sliver or just a nugget of information just through that dialogue that you have with these, really smart people, that it's really rewarding. I think it's great. And you can kind of have that. And I think on the flip side too, is you see, particularly with early stage startups, when you engage with them, right, you have that kind of cross sharing of information. It is very rewarding.
Okay. Now the last question, Scottie, what are you most excited about?
I think, and maybe I'm beating a dead horse, is, on the data side of things, right? And it could, whether it's on the ESG or even kind of financial data, right? You're going back to tried and true ERP sorts of systems. I think if you've seen kind of where we were 15 years ago versus where we are today in things of, AI or ML, or even like robotics process automation, right? Just to make things much more efficient and easier for the user so that they can spend more time on the analysis and teasing out true insights. It is really exciting. And I think as that ramps up and as we get more and more data, and you get the tool sets to enable us to analyze both structured and unstructured data much more quickly. So you're not spending 90% of the time cleaning the data and structuring the data so you can spend 10% of your time in trying to create this bar graph. You're spending 90% of the time on really trying to understand, to use a retail example of, what's the true cross shopping behavior between a Lululemon and, and other retailers, right? And what's that customer profile look like? And, and then how can we target that if you're in marketing, right? Or if you're in leasing, how can I use that data to pitch the new retailers to come to one of Marco's malls? And I think that's all accelerating. And I think there will be, and so it's a very exciting time. I think you're in Marco in my seat versus say 15 years ago, where the availability of data was much less and how we could use the data was much more primitive than today. And I think it's just going to continue to accelerate and blow out over the next, short period of time, let alone long-term timeframes.
Yeah, I completely echo everything just said, Scottie. Now, I'd like to thank both of you for joining me on the Propcast. Obviously, we started speaking a month ago, so I'm so glad we finally got it in the diary. And obviously, it's a pleasure, Scottie, to actually meet you in person. And Marco, I'm planning a trip to Canada soon, so hopefully we'll meet there. And also, congrats to you on your new product launch in the marketplace. And I'm looking forward to catching up with you both after the show. But thank you again.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for joining us this week on the Propcast, and a big thanks to our guests and our sponsors, PropTech and ReamTech. Make sure you visit our website, LMRE.tech, where you can subscribe to our newsletter, keep up with our industry news and events, or if you're looking for your next career move, it's all on there. The Propcast can be found on iTunes, Spotify, and YouTube, where all good content is found. Whilst we're at it, if you found value in the show, we'd appreciate it if you could spread the word and tell a friend about it, or even write us a review. And I'll catch you next week.